Missed an episode of your favorite podcast? Choose from over a decade of content in our archives, not just the latest episode. All free at gcnlive.com.
This is your call to action. Get prepared, America. Economy, survival, energy, disasters. This is USAPrepares.com. Informative radio, educational radio. Interact now by emailing instructor@USAPrepares.com or text at 434-390-7953. Class, please take your seats. Now, your instructor, Vincent Finelli.
Everyone all set, cocked, locked? Here we go. Your dial set correctly to USA Prepares. Thank you for being in class with us today. Jason's engineering the broadcast in Minnesota. I'm Vincent Finelli. We're not going to be taking calls today. Hour number one, Kevin in Florida is going to be talking about appliance repair. Hour number two, Cathy's going to be talking about homemaker tips. Next Thursday, Captain John Reagan will be talking about root canals and Social Security. I'm not kidding about root canals and Social Security. Those are two topics we'll be talking about. The following Thursday, Ricky Rocket will be with us. Just wanted to give you a quick update. Deutsche Bank has now joined the ranks of USA Prepares. It now has gone public with some of its forecasts. And it's saying that the odds of a major solar flare in 10 years is 12%, or 40% in the next 40 years. Deutsche Bank also believes that there's a 33% chance that in the next 10 years there'll be at least one of the following calamities that will strike our planet. And those calamities, those four calamities are, and this is, a 1 in 3 chance of one of these things happening in the next 10 years. Major influenza pandemic killing over 2 million people. A catastrophic volcano eruption. A major solar flare. We're talking about disrupting the power grid. Or global war. So, major pandemic killing over 2 million people. Catastrophic volcanic eruption. A major solar flare disrupting the grid. Or global war. That's what there's a 1 in 3 chance of in the next 10 years according to Deutsche Bank. Now, we've been saying this for years. So I'm glad to welcome Deutsche Bank to the fold of USA Prepares. Kevin in Florida, welcome.
Welcome, Deutsche Bank.
Yeah, took them a while, right?
Maybe they'd like to become USA Prepares instructors.
Yeah, well, they'd probably want to be compensated, and that's out of the question. I mean, we know how to do it for free, and we don't need overpaid bankers to tell us what we know, right? Kevin, I've got a couple quick questions for you before we start appliance repair today, and they're really kind of simple. One is, what do your customers understand about appliance repair in general? Do they have a handle on living with their appliances, or are they in the dark?
I'd say they're in the dark. I doubt many people read the user manuals that they're given. I also think that half of them think that they do know a lot about appliances and appliance repair, and they'd love to tell me that too.
So what I'm reading between the lines is they call you to have you come fix their appliance, and they tell you what's wrong with it.
All the time. Yes. I live in a town where there's a lot of retired military, and for the most part, really sharp. So a lot of them, maybe don't really have the time. Like, you're retired. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
It's not that a lot of people really. I don't think a lot of people really value their appliances as much as they do their vehicle's appearance. So, I don't feel that the ins and outs or want to take care of them very well.
Kevin, you're breaking up. I don't know if you can get in another position that would be better or not, but you're breaking up significantly.
See if
Next question. The next question I have for you is, what do you get the greatest number of calls about? What is the number one call that you get regarding appliances?
I'd have to break that up into different types because it's pretty even around all 5 of the major appliances: washer, dryers, fridge, oven, dishwasher. For refrigerators, it's usually, like we've talked about in the past, some kind of a defrost issue where the drain's blocked up. For dryers, it's usually a no heat issue. Most likely the heating element's just shorted and no longer useful. For dishwashers, usually a drain pump, same with washing machines, clothes washers. And for ovens, usually it's a no-bake issue.
Okay. All right. And of all of those, can our class, with a screwdriver, maybe a Phillips screwdriver, maybe a Thompson, flat screwdriver, pair of pliers, can most of us repair our defrost issue, our dryer no heat, our dishwasher drain pump, and our washing machine, clothes washing machine drain pump? Can most of us repair them with a little assistance, maybe from the internet?
Well, first you have to pull a permit. I'm feeling pretty.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. Most of those things either require a screwdriver, nut driver, or wet back, stop back.
I'm sorry. We built our house and we didn't get a permit for it. And I was just thinking about this gal that showed up, the revenue agent. She showed up 18 months later, scratching her head. We had bulldozers, excavators, and we're making noise for 18 months. She finally comes over and says, "I didn't know there was a house back here." There's no way I would get a permit. Not for a pool, not for a garage, not for a house, not for a dog. No, not for a business. No way. But that's just me.
No, absolutely.
But that was just...
go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I just went on a detour there. But, so you think that, with some, let's say YouTube, videos or, a screen or, your appliance repair website that you've talked about, the student here in class could fix the refrigerator, leaking on the floor, the dryer, no heat, the dishwasher drain pump issue and the washer, drain pump issue, or the no bake in the range or the oven.
It's a great time to be able to do that too, because all of these part stores, profit greatly if they have a popular YouTube video to repair that certain part, replace it. And you can find a great quality video from the 3 major part stores, just about for every common part. So absolutely, definitely.
Are there different prices, Kevin, that you would pay for a part as compared to a homeowner calling in saying, "I don't know what's wrong with it, but I think I need this part"? Are there 2 different prices for that same exact part, whether you call in as a service repair technician, owner of a shop, versus Joe homeowner?
Well, don't put me on the spot here, Vincent. Yes, there is. Yeah.
Okay. Well, never mind. No, don't answer that.
I get a good price from my parts store now that I buy a larger volume.
Yeah. Okay. So when I was,
they only sell original OEM parts. So that's what I prefer to use. But there are aftermarket parts that are about a quarter of the price. And most of them are of a similar, if not equal, quality.
Yeah. Okay, so when I worked as when I was a young guy, let's say 17, 18, I worked at a gas station, and I fixed automobile air conditioning systems. and changed the oil and did other, maintenance items on automobiles. It was an independent kind of a gas station. And it was a Texaco gas station. And I got the uniform. The uniform was just a shirt, and it had the Texaco embroidered logo on it. And so when I wanted auto parts, I found out that there were two different prices, one for the shops and one for, walk-in traffic. So I would call up the shops, and I'd say, I'd be kind of discouraged and disgusted, having to work on this vehicle. And, I need X part. And I would say I was with the Texaco station. And I'd say, I'll send the kid over. And then I'd show up. And I got lower prices because I was in the business. Or they thought I was in the business. I was just the guy, pumping gas and repairing air conditioning units. So it worked, for me. So what I'm telling you, class, is you can negotiate. And when we buy parts at AutoZone, they have the price that everybody pays, and then we tell them we're not paying that price. And we get a lower price. No kidding. I'm not kidding. So yeah, it can be done. But,
right. I started a business account with my local parts store around here. It's called O'Reilly's. And I love these guys. They're very solid, and I've never gotten the wrong part in the wrong box. I'm sure you've experienced.
Mm-hmm.
And they started giving me deals. I actually did my air conditioning in my Ford Expedition recently, and, that's quite a job, but you've got to replace everything if you want it done right.
Yeah, if if the compressor blows, it generally puts contaminants in the system, so you've got to replace the receiver dryer and the expansion valve, and you've got to flush the system. And then, of course, you've got to put the new oil in the compressor, and a lot of things to it. Then you evacuate it, and then you load it with refrigerant, and you have to use the right oil, the right refrigerant, the right viscosity. I mean, there are a lot of components to it. So, yeah. So where are we today, Kevin? What are we going to be talking about regarding appliances?
Well, I was kind of hoping to give you some things because I had some automotive questions for you, if that's okay.
Sure. You're breaking up. And if you could, I don't know what you could do to fix it. It's like a tunnel sound.
Is it okay? I'm a driver and I've got to drop my kids off with their grandparents, and so I hope I think that signal here. Is that
okay?
So, getting it?
Not really, but you have a question for me or questions for me?
Yeah. So the other day, my 2002 Expedition wouldn't start up, and it seemed like a fuel pressure issue. Are you with me?
Yeah, I'm with you.
Okay. And so I bought a fuel pump, I bought a fuel filter, and I bought a fuel pump relay. According to the scan at the auto store, it said I had a bad fuel pump relay circuit, and when I took that relay off, it was red hot. And this is actually the next day because I couldn't get my vehicle started. I actually had to get it towed. So the next day it actually did start back up. And so I actually replaced that fuel pump relay, and it's been running good ever since. Have you ever seen those relays overheat, especially this time of year?
Yes, I have, and let's talk about that when we come back.
Okay, sounds good.
But that's a very interesting question. I've seen it several times on different vehicles. Kevin's with us, and so Kevin's asking me an automotive type question. And the relay in his 2001 Ford Expedition runs hot for the fuel delivery system, the fuel pump. And his question is, why is that? Well, Kevin, it's exactly the same as in appliance repairs in many ways. Let me give you an example. So there are numerous causes for this to happen. One is the fuel pump in most new vehicles is in the fuel tank. And the fuel pump has integral to the fuel pump a fuel filter. So the fuel filter in many new vehicles is part of the fuel pump. So the fuel pump picks up fuel from the bottom of the fuel tank, and it pumps it through the plumbing, the hoses and lines, and up to the front of the car or vehicle where the the fuel distribution system is. There's a fuel pressure regulator and fuel injectors and so forth. Unused fuel goes back to the fuel tank. And when you get fuel, sometimes it comes with dirt. Sometimes there's dirt on the nozzle. Sometimes there's moisture on the nozzle from the previous guy filling his tank in the rain, and there's moisture droplets that gets in the tank. And then there's dirt, and then there's dirt in the gasoline. So eventually that dirt and moisture will plug up the fuel filter. When that happens, the fuel pump works harder and draws more current. When that happens, it tends to stress the connections. And part of that system is the relay. So if the relay is designed for, let's say, 10 amperes, and we're drawing 11, the relay will start to get hotter and hotter and hotter, and eventually, over time, it will fail. That's one thing. Another thing is poor connections of the relay contacts, external to the relay itself, meaning you plug the relay into the fuse box or fuse panel, if you will, and there are maybe 3 or 4 or 5 connections there, and they are they're connections that are friction type connections, crimped connections, and they get weak over time because they get hot and cool and hot and cool, and so that could be part of the reason why there's more resistance and the relay gets hot. Another is I found with a General Motors vehicle, they used substandard current capacity contacts in one of their relays. And over time, 30,000 miles, it would fail. And that was another problem that we found. And then the last one would be actually it's more than that. If the fuel pressure regulator isn't working properly and it's requiring too much pressure from the fuel pump, that would require more current and would require the pump to work harder and would stress the relay. So those are a bunch of ways, things to think about. But there's also a moisture issue. Some of these fuse panel boxes don't keep moisture out, and moisture is an enemy of good contacts. So the contacts could be somewhat corroded, and I mean just barely corroded. We find that a lot with German vehicles, with the old style fuses. You have a fuse that looked perfectly good, but the circuit wouldn't work, and you'd rotate the fuse. They had points on the end of these fuses. They look like, I don't know, kind of like bananas almost, with pointed ends, and exposed fuse elements. And we would rotate those, and we'd find that there was a corrosion that would build up between the fuse having aluminum and lead components and the copper-plated fuse holders. So the difference in the metals with some moisture would cause oxidation, which would cause the fuses to not connect properly to the fuse holders. So those are some of my thoughts.
That makes sense. Do you think the fuel filter is the most likely culprit?
Yeah, and how many miles are on it? 150,000?
It's got 165, yes, sir.
Yeah. So here's what happens. The designers, they're so smart. They they figured
I get it.
why put the fuel pump where you can remove it with two bolts? Why do that and put it on the engine where you can reach it? Let's put it in the fuel tank, where if you have a vehicle like yours, you might have to remove the whole fuel tank or lower the whole fuel tank to get the fuel pump out. And that's a problem if you have fuel in your fuel tank. And one of the things that happens when people can't start their car is they say, let's put some fuel in it. Let's fill it up. Let's see what happens. Then, we got to take the fuel pump out, which makes it way worse. Now, we'll talk about that sock in a minute at the bottom of the fuel pump. That's a really good question. Kevin's with us, and Kevin's in Florida, and he asked me a question about a Ford truck not starting. And we're talking about the fuel system. And I mentioned that the fuel pumps today are sold as an assembly. So part of the fuel pump is the sender for the gas gauge to tell you how much fuel is in the tank. That's part of the fuel pump. And there's a motor that is part of the fuel pump that picks up the fuel from the bottom of the tank and pushes it out through some plumbing. And then there's also a fuel filter. Now, I call it a sock, S-O-C-K, like the kinds that you put on your feet. Well, they call it, I guess the official term is a strainer. Well, it's more like a sock to me. It is not replaceable. And what happens is this thing is, about the size of maybe 4 postage stamps. And the fuel gets picked up from the very bottom of the fuel tank where all the sediment lives. And what happens is this sock is very similar to the material that is in the lining of a pair of men's boots. So it's kind of this Chinese fabric. It's kind of a quilted fabric. And it has very small openings between the fibers to trap small particles of dirt and debris. And what happens is it plugs up very, very easily with very small parts of water mixed with dust and dirt and debris. And it's not cleanable. You can't take it off. You can't buy a new one in most cases. So you're stuck with replacing the fuel pump. And it's at the very bottom of the tank where all the sediment lives. So that, I believe, is a big part of the problem. And to find out if that is, and here's what happens typically. So you drive along and let's say you're on the road for 30 minutes and then the engine kind of stumbles. That's because of all the sloshing and picking up the fuel, plugs up the screen or the sock, if you will. Then when you shut the vehicle off, you let it sit for a little bit, some of the debris falls back down and you can start the engine again. So that is something that I would look at. And the way I would determine if that really is the problem is to put a fuel pressure gauge on the fuel system. And there's a port under the hood where you can check the fuel pressure on most vehicles, including Fords. So I would do that. And you can, they say rent it, but really what you do is you put a deposit on it. So you go to O'Reilly's or AutoZone, you say, hey, y'all have a, fuel pressure test kit, that'll fit this particular Ford. And they'll say, sure. And it's $100 to rent it. So you put down the $100, you use it for the day or two, you bring it back and you get your $100 back. That's what I would do, Kevin.
I bought one of those regulators because I figured I'm going to need it in the future. And, our motto, be prepared. But, they had one of those kits for rent and it came with a multimeter. Why is that?
Mm-hmm. Well, sometimes you want to make sure that just like when you're testing appliances, there's a connector. I believe the Ford might have 3 or 4 wires in this connector. And you might want to check the voltage to see if the fuel pump itself is getting, 12.6 volts. That's what that's for.
They also had a relay tester kit, which I thought was neat. However, that wasn't at this particular store. It was only at special stores. Mm-hmm. But as you probably know, and our audience might not, you have to apply electricity to a relay and have, and there can be, 5 different contacts. So these kits are required, unfortunately, to actually test the relay. But in my case, It was a $20 relay. Mm-hmm. One last question regarding the fuel system. I use seafoam, and I was wondering, might the, sediment gotten stirred up from the seafoam and then clogged up the fuel filter?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, if you read your owner's manual in most vehicles, it'll tell you don't put stuff in the fuel tank, don't put stuff in the oil. Don't put additives in there. And the reason they tell you that is because, well, you could loosen up some scale, you could loosen up some debris because of the detergent action of these additives, and it can plug up your fuel system. So, some mechanics will say, you know what, that sludge in the engine, don't loosen it up. Leave it there. Because if you loosen it up, you'll cause problems. Other mechanics will say, oh, that sludge is causing problems. Loosen it up, put it in the oil filter, and get rid of it. So old mechanics would probably say, just leave it. Just leave it alone and don't put the additives in there because you'll probably do more damage than good. That's what most mechanics would say. But if you go to the Chinese factory outlet or AutoZone or O'Reilly's, you'll see racks and racks and racks of cans and jars and sprays and bottles of things that you can add to your fuel tank and to your engine and cooling system. And since we mentioned cooling system, if you add a stop leak type product, regardless of who makes it, you will most likely find that your heating system, for the winter will have decreased capacity. And that's a really expensive repair. What happens is the substance, the chemicals that plug up the leaks also plug up the heater core. And, it's going to cost, at least $100 for the part, and it'll cost several $100s for the installation of the part. Because typically when a heater core is replaced, for example, on a Mercedes, it might take 11 hours. 11 hours, because you have to disassemble the dashboard. Dodge truck, you have to disassemble the dashboard. It's a major, major problem, and nobody wants to do it.
And that's another pretty easy repair that I've done recently, too, is to flush the heater core.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if you want to do that, there's a really neat thing. I believe Prestone still makes them, and the Chinese factory outlet used to sell these. And it's several components. It is an inline fill connection that you hook up to a garden hose. So you cut the heater line with a pair of real strong scissors or a very sharp knife. You insert this T connector with 2 hose clamps, and then there is a cap that is like the cap that you'd put on the end of a garden hose if you put a cap on the end of a garden hose. And that will close it off for normal purposes. Then there is a spout that fits on the expansion tank of the radiator. And that diverts the water so it doesn't land all over the engine. And then you hook up your garden hose, you start your engine, and you run your garden hose through the pressure of your water through the cooling system, and it flushes everything out. It works great. We have them on many of our vehicles, and, flushing out the heating and cooling system is a great thing to do to prolong the engine's life and to make it operate at the proper temperatures. And what does that cost? About $10. Of course, when you do that, you'll want to put in new antifreeze. And when you do that, make sure that no pets can drink the antifreeze because it'll kill them. It'll kill cats and dogs. And it tastes great, evidently, because it's made with ethylene glycol. It's really sweet. They love it, and they die in like 30 minutes or less.
Do you feel the same way about transmission fluid changes? Just let it be?
Absolutely. No, I don't feel the same way about that.
Oh, you mean just drop
Mercedes-Benz,
don't flush it, though?
Both. We do both. For example, the late model large SUVs from General Motors, the transmission filter is in the middle of the transmission. So to get the transmission out, it's an all-wheel drive type vehicle, you have to take the engine out, you have to take the transmission out, which is a miserable, very expensive job. And this is just to change the transmission filter. Okay? You have to take the engine out, and the transmission, and disassemble the transmission. So what we do in those cases is we flush the transmissions. So we'll disconnect the lines, drain the transmission pan, add fluid, run it, drain it, add fluid, run it, drain it. And it's really an expensive in terms of fluid proposition because General Motors recommends you do it like 4 times, 5 times, maybe 6 times. And you're looking at, almost $100 worth of fluid every time you do it. It's really expensive fluid. So it's an expensive proposition just from the fluid perspective. That's one thing. So don't buy a new vehicle. It's crazy to buy a new vehicle. Now, in the case of your vehicle, I believe you have a separate transmission connected to the engine, so it's in line. The engine's first, the transmission second, then there's a drive shaft. Well, you can take the pan down, the transmission pan, and drain the transmission fluid. And I do that when the transmission is not hot, but warmed up so that the particles are in suspension. I loosen up all the bolts except for 1 or 2. I have a big pan underneath the transmission. I let the fluid drain out. And then when it stops dripping, I take the pan off and let it drip for a day or 2. Because you'll find you get at least another quart or so of transmission fluid coming out after the majority of it comes out. Just like changing your oil. Still, oil drips for a whole day or 2 days. So there's plenty of dirty oil to come out of an engine or a transmission. Then what I do is I put in the new filter. Of course, I clean the pan. Actually, it's something else I do. If the vehicle does not have a drain plug on the transmission, and I don't know if yours does or doesn't. Does it? Probably not, right?
It does.
Oh, it does have a drain plug? Great. Well, if it doesn't, what I do is I find a spot where I can weld on or braze on a nut on the outside of the pan. And, I use a copper washer, and I put my own drain plug on if it doesn't have one. That way, the next time when I, drain the fluid out, it's a lot easier. It's a lot less messy. But I do flush out the lines. Absolutely. And the way I do it is there are lots of ways of doing it, but here's the way I do it. And it's messy. It's a miserable job. I take the transmission filter, and there's usually, in many of them, there is a stub that goes, that connects the filter to the valve body. What I do is I cut that off with a hacksaw, and I radius shape the part I cut off to make sure there's no foreign plastic particles in there. I connect it to a clean rubber hose, and I put that rubber hose in a new gallon of transmission fluid, the correct fluid. And I have somebody on the lift in the vehicle. They start the lift, start the engine, put it in park, and then drive and reverse, and you use the brake, as you do this, and go through all the gears, and fluid will come flying out all over. It's a really messy job. And then that flushes the transmission and the torque converter. That's how I do it. Then I put it all back together and add the correct amount of fluid. So it's messy, but it's the best way to do it.
I take that back. I actually don't have a drain plug on the transmission. Do you replace the gasket on the pan as well, usually?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And here's a trick. There is a lot of these transmission, if you go to O'Reilly and AutoZone, they'll have a gasket that comes with the transmission, filter, a kit. And that's fine, except typically that gasket is made out of rubber. Now, the Mercedes rubber gasket is fine, but most of the domestic gaskets, if they get oil on them at all, will leak. So what we do is we buy a separate gasket made out of cork. And, it's an extra $5 or $10. And we buy that extra cork gasket, and they don't leak. So that's something to think about. And whatever you do, if you use that rubber gasket that comes with the kit, and you can, and it may work, do not put RTV on it. Because if you do, it will leak like crazy. Kevin, I'll be right back. Kevin's with us in Florida, and we were going to talk about appliances, and we got derailed a little bit here. But there's something that I want to mention, class, and this is really, really important. As we get into the summer months and it gets hotter and hotter and hotter, you may be tempted to change your antifreeze flush. Sometimes it's called coolant. Sometimes it's called antifreeze. We're talking about the same thing. You may be tempted to change your antifreeze. And it is absolutely critical that you find out the correct type of antifreeze to use for your vehicle. And I absolutely positively would not trust anybody behind the counter of any auto parts store to give me the right information about what antifreeze to use. Now, here's what I'm talking about. There's an inorganic acid technology that's called IAT that was commonly used between 1920 and 1990. It's typically green in color. Then there's the organic acid technology, OAT, and that is different. Okay, and it has they're different colors. Some are orange, some are bright red, some are blue, and some are dark green. So it's really confusing. And then there's the hybrid organic acid technology antifreeze, which is called HOAT, hybrid organic acid technology, and that's typically yellow or like an orange in color. Now, if you mix them, you can cause problems. You can damage your radiator. Some radiators are made out of aluminum, and they will be destroyed by the wrong antifreeze very, very quickly. So you can't trust the mechanic to put the correct antifreeze in your car. You can't trust the guy behind the counter or the gal behind the counter to even sell you the right antifreeze. You have to look it up for your vehicle in the owner's manual. That's what you have to do. You can't even trust the internet. Okay? That's one thing. Next thing is there's like a universal. And they say you can top it off with this universal antifreeze. Yeah, you can. But topping it off is different from flushing it, and it's different from changing it. Flushing it out means you're going to start over. That's different from topping off. Topping off means just adding a little bit. Okay? So you have to be extremely careful with antifreeze. And the same thing is true with power steering fluid. You can buy power steering fluid at the Chinese factory outlet and you can top off with it. But it's not certified for use to fill the power steering system. Kevin, did I completely confuse the class?
No, I think that's absolutely relevant. And, my situation I had this week where I had to call a tow, just re-illustrated to me that not only do I need to know how to work on cars to save money, but if I'd have brought it into a shop, it could have taken days before they even took a look at it, especially in Florida this time of year where cars are overheating.
Okay, so we have a friend, he's a farmer, a neighbor, and he had a problem with his Ford pickup truck. And so he brought it to, a light came on the dashboard saying that there was a problem. He brought it to Ford. They charged him $90 to tell him that they're really not sure what the problem is, but they can start replacing parts. And they'll start with, the first part, the second part, the third part, and eventually they think they're going to get it. Now, each time they replace parts, we're talking a couple $100. So he's looking at $90 plus maybe $1,000 more by the time he's done. And they don't even know what the problem is. And this is becoming more and more and more common. Even dealerships can't handle the complexities that the automakers have designed into their vehicles. It's extremely complicated. And you know what? None of this is necessary. None of it. I just got done baling 127,000 pounds of hay yesterday. I'm going to do another, bring it up to 150,000 pounds today. And I'm using a tractor built in 1984, I believe, 1984 or 85. I replaced the fuel pump once. It was maybe $30. It took maybe 15 minutes. It's on the engine. It has the original, this 1984 tractor had John Deere. It's a model 2950. It has the original front tires. It's got the original fan belt. I've replaced the water pump once. It's got the original radiator. It's probably 99% original. They used to make things easy to fix back then. A new tractor, you need a computer to fix it. And I don't want that. So I'm not buying anything new. And I'm really glad that you have a 2001 vehicle, because they're a lot easier to fix than the new ones. The new ones are impossible to fix. And if you damage a headlight lens, you can be looking at $400 for what used to cost $1.99, back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s.
You're absolutely right. And I think it gets back to the appliances all going digital as well. There's a plan for the Internet of Things, and everything's going to be on it if the powers that be have their way.
Agreed. And class, I'm not kidding. I'm expecting power disruptions on the grid this summer. I could be wrong, but I don't think so. Brownouts, that means low voltage. Blackouts, no voltage. No current. Nothing. And I think they're going to be fits, stops, starts, outages, and it's going to damage your appliances. Make sure you have surge protection on your house so that you can avoid non-necessary appliance repairs. Kevin, thanks so much. We'll see you in a couple weeks if that's okay with you. Everyone all set? Cocked, locked, hour number 2 of USA Prepares. Thank you for being with us. Cathy in Ohio's with us. Welcome, Cathy.
Hi, Vincent. How are you?
I'm well. I wanted to share with the class a very quick story. It's very disturbing, and then we'll get on to your tips. There's a story, themindunleashed.com, and there was, it goes on to say, last week in Missouri, a 25-year-old woman named Hannah Fizzer was shot and killed by an officer with the Pettis County Sheriff's Office during a routine traffic stop. So this 25-year-old gal was reportedly pulled over because she was speeding and passed through a red light. The officer, who's not been named, claims that she threatened to shoot him, but no gun was found in the vehicle. The Missouri State Highway Patrol is now working the case and claiming to be an impartial outside agency. So what happened was Allegedly, this gal, a 25-year-old, Ms. Fisser, was shot 5 times by the deputy. The deputy says that she threatened to shoot him, so he shot her. But she didn't have a gun. There's no dash cam footage. There is no body cam footage. And most people don't believe the officer's story. What's happening, and the reason I'm mentioning this, class, is more and more of us are being shot and killed by the police. All sizes and shapes and colors. So I suggest that if you're being pulled over or approached by the police, that you be on your best behavior. Okay? Don't say inflammatory things, because they might get you killed. Even though you want to say them, even though I might want to say them, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it, because people are really tense, and there's a heightened level of adrenaline running through the veins of the police department, and they are afraid that they might die, so they're going to kill us first. And in the briefing rooms just before the shift starts, the police are told, let's all go home tonight. That's code speaks for, I believe, shoot first. If you think you're going to get shot, shoot first. I think that's code speak for it. Let's all go home tonight. So I just wanted to share that with you. This is very disturbing. This is as bad as George Floyd. Cathy, what do you have on the blackboard for us today?
Well, Vince, I was thinking about things, a list that people could do right now, thinking about what happened in the last few months, and basically asking, what do I still need, and can I get it? And if I can't, then what can I maybe substitute for those items? Or can I buy, like an extra one? Can I buy parts for those items just in case we can't get them in the near future? So that's kind of what I have, a few topics that I would like to bring up, and then maybe I have some ideas that we can substitute some things if we don't have them or we can't get them.
Sounds great. Let's go right into it.
Okay. One of the things that I wanted to bring up was gardening. And if you can get buckets, even if you can get like the 5-gallon buckets from the bakeries or Home Depot or places like that, hold on to those, because anybody that gardens needs watering cans and buckets and something to hold everything in. And I have a certain small bucket that I use, and when I'm out weeding, if I find certain edible weeds or edible plants, I put all those in that bucket, and then I put the other weeds in a bucket that I don't want to compost. I put those in another bucket, so that I have those edibles right there, because a lot of times when you're weeding, you just pull and then you don't use them. So I do that. But I think if you can buy, maybe have an extra pair of pruners, and I mentioned last week that one of my favorite is called Felco, Felco. That's a very good pruner. It lasted me 20 years, and it's still going. But a good trowel is another thing. Spend the extra money and get one with a point on it. Get one that's not going to bend. If you can bend it, it's never going to dig through clay. So maybe have an extra trowel and a shovel, and plenty of garden gloves, even if you have to go like with the suede, the heavier duty ones. Another thing that I have done, when you have those foam knee pads that you buy, those really don't last that long. So what I did was I had some boat cushions, and they were foamy in the middle, and they were waterproof, and I used those because they last a long time. So that's something, if you can get your hands on a good boat cushion, or if you have one at home, or even like a seat, like sometimes they have those seats that you can put in, like when you go to like stadiums or something and you want to sit down, you can use those too. Those last a lot longer than them little thin foam cushions that you kneel on. Pots for your plants. I have stacks of them in my barn, and I love to share my plants with people. If I have extra perennials or extra raspberry shoots or things like that, or somebody wants to give me some, I have a lot of those. If you don't have them, then save your coffee containers and take a nail and pound holes in the bottom. You can use soup cans, anything like that, that if you want to start your seeds or you want to have to transplant something, I save all those kinds of things. You could even use like containers that, like cottage cheese containers, or even like small totes that maybe they broke or they've got a crack in them or something. That doesn't matter if you just want to transplant things and you just have to have a place to put it so you can get it to whoever you're giving it to or put it somewhere else in your yard. So that was some of them with the gardening. Seeds, obviously, if you can get your hands on seeds and preserve those for the fall and for next year. But I think if we can really focus on your gardening and being prepared, because that is going to help you with your food source. My other topic that I wanted to bring up was your kitchen tools and small appliances. What can you substitute, or can you get an extra one? What about a coffee pot? What if your coffee pot dies? Can you buy replacement parts for it? Can you buy one that you can put on the stove or something like that, where you don't necessarily have to have like the kind where you pour the water in? You could, if you have one on the stove, you can just turn it on and brew it that way. Your toaster. If you have an extra toaster, can you use a toaster oven if you have one of those? So I was going down like things I use all the time, my food processor, crock pot. If you have an electric skillet, you could use that if your stove dies. If you have a convection oven, you can use that if your oven dies. So those are things that the two areas that I really was thinking about, like looking around my kitchen. What do I use every day, and what can I substitute it with if it breaks?
All very well said, Cathy. I've got a couple comments. Trowels. My mom bought trowels in the 1960s, and there were trowels made in Japan with substandard steel, and you would go to use them and they would bend. So right between the blade of the trowel and the handle, they would just break off and they were just junk. Quickly she learned that quality is the way to go. So then she bought some really nice, more expensive trowels, and we still have them. So from the 1960s, that's 60 years later, we're still using the same trowels that my mom bought from the 1960s, quality trowels. So you're absolutely correct about that. When you talked about buckets, I have, in the good old days, I've been able to go to the bakery department of the Chinese factory outlet, and you can ask them, you can say, y'all have any of those buckets? Can you save some for me? Now, they don't let anything out of the store without a price tag, but they'll be glad to rinse them out and save them for you, and you might get 5, 6, 7, 10 buckets for 99 cents. They'll be used, but what comes in the buckets that they will save for you? Typically frosting. So when you think of, Walmart with these cakes, these sheet cakes that they make, these birthday cakes and holiday cakes, they don't make the frosting. They buy the frosting. It comes in buckets. Some buckets might be 2 gallons, 3 gallons, 4 gallons, 5 gallons. So those are food grade buckets that had food in them. So you don't necessarily have to worry too much about what was in those buckets from Walmart, because when you buy them, the labels of what was in them is still on the buckets. So it's not like buying a used bucket that had transmission fluid in it, or engine oil, or who knows what, insecticides. So that, go to a food store. And Walmart, if you happen, I haven't been to a Walmart in a long time, because of the corona panic, but if you have the desire to do it, that's a place to get them. But I don't even know if they're making cakes anymore. The next thing you were talking about was a cottage cheese container. And we don't throw anything away. The cottage cheese container lids that we've had accumulated for the last 20 years, we still have a bunch of them. And so if I'm in the kitchen and I have, a cup of water, I put a cottage cheese container lid on top of that. So if there's any flying objects like flies that, want to land on it and have a sample of whatever's in my cup, it keeps them off there. And the cottage cheese containers, I use them, the heavier grade ones, maybe, the larger ones. I keep them in the sink and I keep water in them, filled with water. And so let's say we're having lunch, forks, knives, spoons go right in there and they stay wet. And it makes it so much easier when I take the brush and scrub off any of the food that sticks to the, knives, forks, spoons, etc. before I put it in the dishwasher. So we don't throw anything away, and I'm hearing Cathy does the same thing. So there's a use for lots of things. We've got stacks of, cottage cheese containers, yogurt containers, and the like. And we use them in the garage. We use them in the barn. We put automotive parts in them. If we take a transmission apart, or we work on a lawnmower, or work on a rototiller, instead of just leaving the parts on the ground, or on the pavement, or on the garage floor, they go in the bucket, or they go in the yogurt container, or the cottage cheese container. And if we can't fix the item right away, we put the lid on it, take a Sharpie marker, and write what is in that container. That goes to this lawnmower. So lots of reasons to not throw anything away, including cans. We don't throw cans away. We reuse them many, many, many times. And you can do the same thing. And Cathy talked about kitchen tools. We'll talk about that when we come back. Cathy's hit on some very important points, class, about tools for the kitchen and spare parts and things. So, do you have a manual can opener? We don't have an electric can opener. We used to. I'm sure many houses had them. But you don't need an electric can opener. We have the kind that you turn the crank. It's made by a company called Swing Away. Swingaway. You can buy on the internet if you'd like. And we rinse it off. We rinse off the cutting wheel every time we use it. Now, I don't know how long they last, but I can tell you this, that ours have lasted at least 15 years so far. And I have no desire to replace them. Another thing that you might want to get is a manual bottle opener. Now, the liquor stores used to give them away. If you bought a 6-pack of beer, you get, or a case of beer, you get, a manual can opener / bottle opener. And you might want to have one of those, because if all else fails, you can use the sharp-edged can opener to open a can. Another thing you might want to have is a sharpening stone for knives. I don't know how long they last, but we've had ours for at least 20 or 30 years, and I paid $2 for it. I just looked it up on the internet on eBay. The same one or one similar. It's an 8-inch aluminum oxidized dual grit sharpening stone. $9.99 shipped. You can also get it for $7.99. Well, 6-inch one, $7.99. So we use them all the time. We sharpen our knives. And there's a trick to it. You might want to look up on how to do it on the internet. But when you sharpen your knives, be aware that there's little tiny microscopic sized particles of metal and stone on the edge of that knife. So we wash it, wipe it off with a towel. Be careful not to cut yourself. And then we wash it again and wipe it off and make sure we're not eating that aluminum oxide and those particles of stainless steel or carbon steel, depending on what the knife may be. Cathy, your comments?
Oh, I forgot to mention those things, but that's a great idea. The can opener, I have a manual also, and I bought a backup one. And check them to make sure they work when you get home if you buy one, because I've had sometimes where they've been broken or they just don't look that sturdy. Vince, the other thing I do is... There was that cheap one that you could buy, even back in the 60s. And it was,
kind of a bent steel thing with an edge for a cutter, not a cutter wheel, just an edge that would cut. And they worked okay, and they would last a while, a couple of years. But they are no match for the swing away. Now, swing away might cost you $8, $9, or $10, depending on which model you buy. They have one with a long crank. They have one with just a knob, that you turn, that kind of thing. So get whichever one you want. But I suggest you consider swing away. It's top of the line, best you can get in a manual can opener, and it could last the rest of your life. And that's what we do. That's what we have. Please continue, Cathy.
One tip that I will give people, because I've had some of I think they're birds that are eating my green pepper plant. You can take tulle. It's like the bridal veil material. It's spelled Tulle. And you can wrap it around the plant and tie it gently. And the birds and the bunnies and the squirrels don't like to get near it because their nails and they get caught in it. And so if you put that around there, they don't like it. If you've got something that is crawling up and eating something on your plant, if you're maybe have a tropical plant or something, the same thing, you can tie tulle around it. You can put tulle over a whole area. Let's say you have lettuce or something. It's very lightweight. It's lighter than a screening material. And you can just anchor it down, and it keeps the critters from eating your plant. So that's one tip if people are having trouble with that. They just don't like to get caught in it. You can wrap it around pots if you've got container pots. You can put it over the top. However you can figure out how to do it, you can cover it because it's pretty sheer, so it's not really going to hurt the sun coming in and hitting your plant.
Very good. And, we have some puppies who really like chewing on things, and we just put some pepper sauce, like Tabasco, diluted, and we put that on some of the surfaces to encourage them to do something else instead. And that works too. Sometimes vinegar works, but vinegar's corrosive, so be careful and do some research. Cathy and I'll be right back. Class, you're not going to believe what I'm about to say, but here it goes. I'm very concerned about survival, as you know, and I'm concerned about the grid going down, and I'm concerned about the unavailability of electricity. And I'm also concerned about the lack of manufacturing in the United States. We don't manufacture electronics. We don't manufacture electric toothbrushes. We don't manufacture electric can openers. We don't manufacture microwave ovens, TVs, DVD players, etc., televisions. We don't make any of radios. We don't make any of that stuff. So when I was thinking about mini-max regret, what would my maximum regret be regarding cooking? One of those things is, what about operating some kind of a heating device to warm food without using a lot of electricity? What would that be? Well, obviously it's a microwave oven, right? So I bought a new microwave oven. It's made in China, as all of them are. I bought a Panasonic inverter technology type, about, I think, somewhere between 1.4 and 1.6 cubic feet. So it's a medium size, and it's in the box. I'm going to test it, make sure it works, and it's going back in the box. Now, why is that? Because I'd rather have a microwave oven that works if I need it than not have one if I need it. So that's just a thought. Cathy, are you seeing continued depletion of items on store shelves like electronics, like microwave ovens and small appliances?
Yes, I am. Everything. Actually, my daughter went into a TJ Maxx, and she said it is so bare that they look like they're going out of business. She said that, now the one lady told her that when they first opened, people came in and bought quite a bit of items, but she said they've spread all the aisles out. There's virtually no electronic things there now. And even the home goods was the same way. They used to have toasters and small blenders, small appliances and things like that. She said there was not one there. So that's a wonderful idea, Vince.
Okay, and I'll tell you, I just looked it up, class, what I bought, and I based on the reviews, that I read, and you can't really believe reviews. So you have to read, lots and lots of reviews and discount the ones that say this thing walks on water, and then discount the ones that say this is absolutely junk and it was broken when I received it. So I bought it at Sam's Club, and it's a 1.6 cubic foot, and they say stainless steel, but it's just a veneer, a very thin amount of stainless steel. So it's a 1.6 cubic foot. It was $139.98. In club, it's out of stock. Online, it's in stock. Now you can spend less and you can spend more. I wanted one that I thought was durable. I looked at the how much these things weigh. The heavier, to me, the better. I mean, when someone, when a product is advertised as lightweight, easy to carry, I'm thinking substandard. I want the heavy version. Cathy, I had a question for you. When you cook your tomatoes, do you cook them in a big pot on the kitchen stove, or do you have one of those turkey-type fryers with a big pot outside?
I do mine on the stove. I have a huge, I think it's I want to say, I could be wrong, I think it's like a 16-quart stock pot. It's pretty big. Mm-hmm. And I have a propane for my stove, and I've got, it's called the speed burner, the heavy-duty burner. And I put it on there, and then once I get it up to a boil, then I just turn it down as long as it's simmering. That's how I do it. I don't have the other turkey fryer outside. I do have a extra burner that you can plug in. I know they take a lot of wattage, where they just have, it looks like a stovetop. It's just got two little burners on it. And I did buy that because sometimes I can with other people, and I just don't have room on my stove with those big stock pots to get anything else on there. So I will plug those in if I need to get water boiling, or if I need to keep jars hot or something like that. Mm-hmm.
So my question relates to BTUs, British thermal units, or heating capacity. And, when you have one of those larger stock pots, and that's way bigger than what you would use to cook spaghetti. Spaghetti might be 5, 6, 7 quarts. You're talking, double that in size, or even larger in some of these stock pots. So, do you think the typical stove, let's say it's a natural gas stove or a propane burner, would you think that would have the capacity to fire up one of these big stock pots, or not? A typical one, not one of these high-powered ones.
I think so, Vince. I had one when I lived in a different house. I didn't have quite the heavy-duty stove I had, and I still canned with that one, and it did well. Now, the one thing I will tell people is if you have a glass-top stove, don't put those heavy pots on there. They can ruin those burners, and they can crack. I learned that. So a friend told me that. She goes, do not ever use a real heavy canning things on a glass top stove.
Cathy, what is the ideal size in your world for a stock pot to make, spaghetti sauce or tomato sauce? So, if a person is going to actually can for real, not the trial type canning, but to can for real, to set up that assembly line, where the whole family is involved in canning for the year, getting, that large amount of tomatoes from the garden. What is the ideal size? Is it 16 quarts? Is it 24 quarts? Is it 30? Is it 40? What is the ideal size?
Well, I like the 16 quart for me, because if you need to use your other burners to get things warmer, you can't fit anything behind. If you have a huge pot, and the other thing is it's very heavy to lift if it's full. So I can handle the 16 quart full, but you can't get anything else on your burners if your pot is really, really big. Now, if you've got the room and you're making a huge amount, let's say you're making bushels, that's fine. But I actually have two stock pots that I get one going, and then this is a little bit smaller. And then once the one that I have that is canning, that is ready to go, I move the other one over and let that start to simmer and cook down so that I can finish canning the great big 16-quart one, but I don't have one bigger than that. I have some that are I probably have 4 total. I have a 16-quart, I probably have 2 12-quart, and I probably have, like an 8 to 10-quart one. But if I'm just making the sauce at home, I normally use like a good-sized Dutch oven. Like if I'm going to make the meat sauce and all that, then I use like a Dutch oven, and I'll make a big batch, like use 3 or 4 pounds of meat when I do that.
Okay. I bought when I bought our stock pot, I bought a stainless steel one because we're using, tomatoes and they're acidic, and I didn't want to leach the aluminum into the tomato sauce, so I bought a stainless steel one. And I bought a long-handled spoon that's all stainless steel. What I see most people doing on the internet, on these videos and in these, how-to articles on preparing tomato sauce, they use either a stick or a wooden spoon. Now, my grandmother used a wooden spoon, but I'm kind of thinking that's because that was before there was stainless steel. What are your thoughts about using wood versus stainless steel?
Well, I have heard some people say use non-metallic. I haven't looked into it. I have used the great big, I have an old wooden spoon that I do use, but I also have a big stainless steel spoon that goes down to the bottom of my stock pot. But I have heard some people say to use non-metallic with the tomatoes, but I've never had any problem with it, Vince. I guess I haven't checked into that, so I don't know for sure.
You know what? I think it may be a reaction with, let's say, someone using a stainless steel, which is chrome and nickel, as a spoon to stir, with aluminum as the pot, and it may be something with the acid as the electrolyte, the aluminum pot, and the chrome and nickel as the spoon. That may be the issue, and maybe that's why they say use wood, because you're not creating a battery. Literally, you'd be creating a battery between any 2 dissimilar metals and an electrolyte. So you could take a nickel and a dime and some salt water, and you can create, a cell, an electric cell. You could take a copper penny and a dime and some salt water and create a cell. Any 2 metals that are dissimilar, you can create, electricity with it. As a matter of fact, literally, you could take an iron rod and pound it into the ground, and a few feet away, take an aluminum rod. They're dissimilar metals, pound it into the ground, sprinkle some water between those 2 rods, and you can measure current being generated by those 2 rods pounded into the ground. So you need to be careful, class, when you're working with metals and acids and bases, because you could be creating a cell, or if you had multiple metal items in the electrolyte, it could be multiple cells or a battery. A battery is a collection of cells. So that could be it, Cathy. I don't know at this point. I have to do more research, but that's my hypothesis so far. What are your thoughts about a convection oven? Do you have a recommendation on a particular one that you like?
Well, it's a funny story. My husband went to an auction back in, I want to say it was like 1982, and he won this convection oven for me, and I didn't even know what they were. And I had this convection oven for probably 25 years, and I gave it to my son who moved out. I love convection oven. I don't remember the name of it. Right now I have a convection oven that's over my stove just to save counter space, and that's a Whirlpool, and I really like it. They cook faster. They bake very well. They crisp things up a little bit better. If I need to bake something or cook something, I prefer to use a convection oven over a regular oven. And it's smaller, so I can't always do that. But I have a Whirlpool right now, which I like. And I did have a Cuisinart before we moved. So, but we have a built-in one above the stove right now.
Do you think that the one you had from 1982 might have been a Farberware? No,
Vince, it was off name. it was kind of like a cream color, and it had a glass door that opened. It didn't go down. It opened like a microwave door, kind of, with a hinge on the side. But it's so long ago, and I gave it to him like 10 years ago, but it was off-brand. It wasn't something, but it was a nicest convection oven. And what's nice about a convection oven is you can, if you need to bake, let's say you need to make baked potatoes at 450 and you need to make something else at 325, I use both ovens sometimes so I can get my meal done, especially for holidays and gatherings.
Okay. Well, we'll be right back. Cathy is sharing her wealth of knowledge and homemaker skills. And this is home economics class. It's something that's not taught in schools anymore. We'll be right back. Cathy's with us, and we're teaching home economics today. Cathy, I looked up the convection oven that I bought on the internet. I bought it used, and it's probably from the 80s as well. And I found one on eBay, and I'm not saying to buy it or not buy it, class. I'm just saying that if you want to see what it looks like, it's a Farberware, Farberware, one word, Farberware convection turbo oven. It's a model 460/5. And it has a wood grain finish. It has a glass door. It has two mechanical knobs. One is for temperature, and the other is for time. It has a glass door. It has a rack, and it's $150 used. I'm sure that's more than it was when it was brand new. $30 shipping. If you decide to buy one of these, Joey saw ours years ago. He was so impressed with it that he bought one, and he uses it every day. We use ours almost every day, and it's almost an industrial type quality. It's really, really good. They make one with digital controls. I suggest you avoid that one. Do not get the digital one. Get the one with the mechanical timer and the mechanical temperature control. Two knobs on the upper right, glass door, a removable rack. It is great. Now, bear in mind, it gets hot on all sides, so don't push it too far against the backsplash of your Formica countertop or your Wilson Art countertop, because it can burn it. So, keep some space. It runs on 120 volts, and I think you'll be impressed. If you buy one, my suggestion is look at the pictures and make sure it's clean. If it's all greasy and you think you can clean it up, the answer is probably not, because there'll be grease inside the motor that moves the air, and it's probably going to wear out very, very quickly. So spend a little bit more if you have to, and buy a really clean one. But Cathy is right. Convection ovens are great. And if you want to have a pizza that's almost as good as the pizza shop pizza, and you get one of those take home and bake pizzas, if you put it in a convection oven, it will be almost as good. Almost as good. Way better than any other way of making a pizza that I've found. Cathy, your thoughts?
Yeah, I've been using one for, almost 40 years now, and I love it. I really like it better than an oven. I like the way the texture and it cooks and it crisps things up nicely, and you're right. And I agree, buy a good one and you'll be happy with it. The cheap one's just going to fall apart.
Yeah, don't buy a Chi-Com, a little tiny one. Get the real deal. And seriously, avoid the electronics. Go with the knobs. Way better. Way better. I mean, it doesn't look as sophisticated, and it's not, and that's what's better about it. So you can buy, junky things from China, or you can buy a used one, and it's okay to buy a used one. It really is. Now, I'm sure Joey found one for less than I was able to find one for. He's really good at that. I'll have to ask him next time I chat with him about how much he paid for his, but he uses it all the time. And the way it works, class, is really simple. There's a heating element, just like an electric stove, but there's a fan that circulates the air. So the air keeps moving and moving and moving all over the food, and that's what makes it cook faster, and you can cook at a lower temperature. So, for example, if it's 350-degree suggestion for cooking an item, you might cook it at 325 with the convection oven. Is that what you found too, Cathy?
Yeah, you cook in less time, and you can reduce the temperature. You can just play around with it. I found that about 25% less time cooking if you're going to make maybe muffins, or you're going to cook chicken, or you're even going to make like scalloped potatoes or something. You just kind of get used to it. I would just kind of be prepared to check it about 25% less time that you would normally set it for in an oven.
Cathy, do you have any other items quickly for the last few minutes of the broadcast today?
Yeah, Vince, I kind of had different things I wanted to talk about. I'll just kind of say a couple things, and maybe we can do them at a different time. But making your own, like, soap in your own, like, dishwashing detergent, like, for the dishwasher, and I make my own laundry soap, that type of thing. I also I use homeopathic remedies. I'm sure Dr. Shealy is an expert on that. I do have his book. But I do use those quite a bit, and I would say to stock up on some of those. The last thing I wanted to mention is about our pets. If you can learn how to make their own food, I would say either get a good book or print off some recipes. It's not that hard to do. I've been cooking for our lab for almost the whole time she's been born. I cook like things like the meat with the bones on it, and I put it in a stock pot or a crock pot, and then you can just learn the proportions. But I feel like a lot of the dog food, if you don't know what you're looking for, has problems. Avoid anything that's got like the byproducts in it. And that's a whole other story. I had an incident with one of my dogs with that. But if you can learn to cook for your pets, and if you really can't right now, try to buy a good quality food and buy extra.
Very good point, and that's what we've done. We bought extra, and we put it in those removable lid 55-gallon steel drums that were used for food, and that's what we keep our dog food in, and we have enough for a while. You might want to do that class for your dogs. Cathy, think about what we'll talk about next time. Send me an email, please. Thank you so much for being with us and sharing your wealth of knowledge.
You're welcome.